Great stories have a lot of things in common. They have great characters. They're about people that we can empathize with, or non-human characters that are humanized. Great stories have tension. They set up what Aristotle talked about in ancient Greece. They establish what is and what could be, and the gap between that is the tension. That's what a great story does. Great stories also are relatable. They help us to be in a place where we can have that empathy and we can comprehend why they matter to us or to people we care about. And great stories also are what I call fluid, or fluent, which means that you can get through them quickly, that you can not get bogged down in how they're told and what words are being used or how complex they are, so that you can get what really matters, which is that plot and those characters. For a brand to find out the right approach to storytelling that it should take depends on a few things. It depends on primarily the audience and what the audience wants, and the brand's current relationship with that audience. So if you're trying to reach new people, you want to tell stories about things that you have in common in terms of shared interests and values. So if you're trying to reach people, you want to reach them where they're already hanging out, say on the internet or on whatever channels, and you'll get them with stories about things that they care about. So you want to connect around things that you care about too. If your relationship is deeper, then you can talk about things that you care about, that you want them to care about. So if the audience already knows who you are and you're trying to get them to do business with you, or to, for whatever reason, like your brand more than they already do, tell stories about the people who are working on the things that you're providing in your company. You can tell stories about your customers. You can tell stories even about your products and services and why they matter and how you made them. But you can't really tell those stories effectively if people don't already have some interest in you. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I'll say about the kinds of stories that brands should tell is you should stick to things that are congruent with who you are as a brand. So people talk a lot about authenticity in advertising. They talk a lot about trust in advertising. And really, when brands are telling stories, they are in this weird space as an advertiser who's also acting as a publisher. People trust publishers because they know what they're getting from them. And we trust newspapers because we believe that the news is true. We stop trusting the newspaper when we feel deceived. We trust the author of Harry Potter because the stories that she gives us we know are fiction. We know what we're getting. Both cases, there's congruence. So a brand that's telling stories about how we need to care about the environment, but if that brand is simultaneously dumping pollution in the river, that's going to backfire. So you want to be congruent with who you are and what you're actually doing, because today the internet has this way of outing people and companies, and especially companies that are not doing what they're saying. The reason stories are important for brands is because the way that human beings build relationships with each other and make each other care is through stories. Our brains are wired to create empathy. There's a neurochemical actually called oxytocin that fires around our brain whenever we see someone we care about or someone familiar. And that's the same chemical that fires in our brain when we watch a movie and you see James Bond hanging from a cliff. It's the reason you start sweating, is because your brain is caring about this person. And that's the way that human beings are wired. So we're built to care about people because of the stories that we see from them. Stories also help us remember things. A story is a way to package a whole lot of information in a way that more of your brain becomes active, and so you remember it better. So brands want to do both of these things. They want people to have an emotional relationship with them, and they also want people to remember them. So that's the reason why storytelling is so fundamental, I think, to brands as marketers, because this is what businesses want to do. And if someone has a relationship with you, if they care about you as a brand, they're going to be more likely to do business with you over a long period of time. And so it's an investment in a relationship that requires, like an investment, a little bit of patience, but it pays off a lot more than having really shallow relationships with people who will then leave you for someone else. Convincing advertisers to tell real stories is tough. It's changing a habit, right? That advertising has for a long time shifted to talking only about themselves and why you should buy now. So it's tricky. I think the most important thing is to show how storytelling throughout history has made a difference, and to show case studies of advertisers that are doing really well and have done well. In my company, Contently, our first customer that really changed the way that we think about content and advertising was a company called Mint.com. Now, Mint was a tool to manage your finances, and they wanted to get users. And instead of doing regular advertisements like all of their competitors, they started a blog about how to understand your finances. And so they started doing content around understanding finances with stories of real people and real events in the world. So when the financial crisis happened in America and kind of everywhere, Mint did infographics about how to understand what the financial crisis means for you and what you should do and how it's affecting real people. And through those stories, through those infographics and the blog posts that they did, they managed to get millions of people to sign up for their company because people really believed that Mint actually cared about helping you understand your finances, which is also what they sold, was a product to do that. So that was our first real customer at Contently that convinced us that this was a better path than so much of the rest of the advertising world. And so case studies like that, I think, are really important to help convince advertisers that this stuff does work and it actually works better and it pays off in the long run much more effectively than short-term campaigns. We do a lot of original research and reporting at Contently about the content marketing and brand publishing industry. We have a report that's just coming out about how regular people who are not in the advertising industry, how they perceive native advertising and sponsored content. And there's a few big takeaways that are in this report that we're releasing, but more than half of people say they have felt deceived by a native ad at some point, which is not good. The reason that's not good is because there's a lot of really good native advertisements out there, and native advertising is a very effective way to build relationships with people through stories. But if a few companies deceive people, then people will trust the whole thing. They will mistrust the whole thing. And when we don't want that to happen. So we have this report that's coming out that we basically looked at all sorts of different campaigns from different publishers, different advertisers, the way that they're labeled, the things that they did, and what made people trust them or not, or feel bad about them. We've done studies like this before that often paint this industry in not a perfect light. And we've been asked, why would you produce research and content that makes your own industry look bad? And it's because we want the industry to last a long time. We don't want this thing which is good, which is brands telling stories instead of just annoying people with regular ads. We want that to be a thing for a long time. We don't want it to be ruined by a few bad actors. So we do a lot of research on that, and we also do tell a lot of stories of how companies do this stuff well and how they're effective with their brand storytelling. One of the big problems with this industry now is that it's very easy to produce content, which means there's a lot of content. So a challenge for brands is how do you make content that stands out? If there's the same amount of attention that people have, but a lot more things to pay attention to, that makes things more competitive. And we've seen the same pattern in a lot of different cases in history. When music became easy to produce with your own laptop, suddenly there were all sorts of musicians. And when it became easy to print up a book, suddenly there were all sorts of books. In every case, what tends to happen is we start out becoming very interested in the new technology, the latest thing, the new medium. Everyone is fascinated by Snapchat because it's new. In the same way that, when films first came out, everyone was fascinated by really boring, mundane films of people shoveling garbage or horses going down the street. But then after a while, when there's a lot of those, people don't pay attention, they don't care. What they care about are great stories. And so this pattern that you see throughout history, and regardless of the medium, that applies just as well to content marketing and native advertising, is that once there's a surplus of content, you have to be extra creative and you have to be extra good, extra high quality to matter at all. So when music became easy to produce, suddenly everyone, including me in college, were making music and putting it on the internet, and a lot of it was garbage. But then we were able to discover amazing talent that wouldn't have been discovered before because they were also putting their music online. So it's not the easy answer to the question, but the truth is that if you want to stand out, you have to do better than everyone else. And I think a goal that brands should have is to do 5 or 10 times better than the regular thing that they're seeing or reading or watching, because that's going to really capture attention. The other thing that you can do as a brand to actually be more creative and be better than the regular mass of content is to use testing, is to optimize what you're creating and where you're putting it. And so you have companies that have sort of shown this, pioneered this path of creating content, connecting to an audience, and then optimizing the content very, very quickly using technology. Companies like Upworthy a few years ago, that they would test 25 headlines before they would send a story to their email list. This sort of thing ensures that the maximum number of people are going to pay attention, and that also you're improving your work constantly. And you don't have to just test headlines. You can test the formats of content, whether it's text or video. You can test the platforms you're putting it on, the different channels. You can also test the stories themselves. What are the things that people are really connecting to, really relating to? And through that process, you can actually use a little bit of science to get better and to stand out in this sort of crazy, noisy hurricane of content.